All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this seminar on employees versus independent contractors, a legal perspective. Well, my presentation is going to be a legal perspective, but I'm going to do the legal side, and then Noura Masri, who's an accountant, is going to talk about the financial implications of these differences. So if you don't know me already, I'm an attorney and I practice business law and contracts, and I serve a lot of businesses, and this issue comes a lot. And so that's why we are putting this presentation together today.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for a lot of businesses.
The agenda today is that first I'm going to go over the legal differences, like I said before, between employees and independent contractors, the rights of each category, and what happens if you misclassify. And then Noura will talk about it from a financial perspective, and then we can do a Q&A for anyone who has any questions. If you have questions, you can just drop it in the chat or in the Q&A if you have that button, and we will answer all the questions at the end. So first of all, why does classification even matter? You started a business or you have a business and you want to hire an employee. Can't you just hire them and then just pay them and keep it simple? Unfortunately, no. And there's really two reasons why we have to classify. One, because employees have legal rights. And the second reason is because Uncle Sam wants his money, i.e. taxes. And so I have them really in four categories. Like I said, payments and wages. This is more of a right of the employee to be paid in a certain way, like minimum wage laws and that sort of, like that area of law. And then workers' rights, like they're entitled to not be discriminated against, they have their rights if it comes to like a disability, sick leave, how many hours they, can work at a time. And of course, like workers' compensation insurance, once you hire an employee, then you have to carry workers' compensation insurance. If there's an injury on the job and you don't have that insurance, then you're in violation of the law, and also then you don't have insurance. An agency too, I don't want to oversimplify agency, but basically it's that employees act on behalf of the employer. So if the employee does a mistake or there's a harm or an injury, the employer can be liable. Like I said, this is a very complicated area of law, but that's the gist of it. And of course, taxes, which Noura is going to talk about too. So why do employers even misclassify? Like I said, people think, oh, I'm just gonna, I need help in my business. I'm gonna bring someone in and I'll pay them. And so when I, talk to businesses and employers, the reasons vary, but it seems like the most common reason is because they just don't know. A lot of employers think, oh, I'm just going to classify them like this. And they don't realize that it's not really up to them. It's the law that decides. Sometimes employers think that, that they'll just have less overhead. It's less responsibility. I just pay the person to do the job, and then that's it. Also, they falsely believe that it's less liability. So like what I said before, that employees act on behalf of the employer. So employers think, well, if I classify them as an independent contractor, I don't have to worry about that. But again, that's not true. Just because the employer misclassifies them, it doesn't mean that the employer loses that liability. And again, the employer also, this is kind of similar, that the employer has less liability when it comes to the employer thinks that they can avoid like labor laws and the rights of the worker. Again, you can't do that, but they think that they can. And the employers sometimes just don't want to deal with payroll and taxes, and they don't want to give benefits, or they can't, because sometimes it's hard. And so like those are the main reason. And now that we have something called a gig economy, where a lot of people are actually wanting to be freelancers, right? We have things like Uber now, or Uber Eats, where people kind of work these like side hustles, that we call them. And so that's also becoming a problem, where the lines are being blurred, especially now with working from home. If someone is not coming to an actual place of business, does that change your classification? And so because of the lack of clarity in the law and the change in technology, that's another reason why employers often misclassify. So how misclassification happens, it's kind of similar, but basically that the employer misclassifies. It's that simple. And again, like I said, it's not up to the employer to classify, it's the law that decides. And the Fair Labor Standards Act, defines an employee as an individual, that is employed by an employer, and to employ as including to suffer or permit to work. As you can see, that is a very clear definition, and we all know what that means. And it's very easy, right? So we can thank our government for having a clear definition. And that, obviously I'm being sarcastic. That's very hard to understand, and it doesn't even make much sense. So what happens when the law is not clear is that courts will come in and clarify, or they'll add, I don't want to say add, but they'll kind of expand on the law. So how do you know the difference between an employee or an independent contractor? The court laid out a test. It's called the economic realities test. And it's 5 factors that determine whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. So really it is case by case. There's no clear line, and you just have to go over these 5 factors. Each factor is weighed equally. So it's not like factor number 1 is more important than factor number 2. It's all the same. And like I said, it's just case by case, but I'm going to run through them quickly just so you have an idea. The first factor is the amount of control that the employer has over the worker. So if the employer is making you come in on, like for like certain hours and to do certain things and to bring and to have certain equipment and to do things a certain way, that is, that's the first factor. And that's probably a huge common pitfall, actually, where a lot of employers end up doing misclassifying because they don't take that into account. The second factor is the worker's opportunity for profit or loss. So in other words, are they investing in your business? And by investment, I don't mean that they work more hours. It's actually like, are they actual investors? Like, are they, becoming part of the business? And if they're not, then they're more likely to be considered an employee. The third factor is the degree of skill and independent initiative required to perform the work. So in other words, if the person is, or if the worker is, that if the employer is controlling how the skill is being used, then that worker is more likely to be considered an employee. If the worker has more independence to use their skill, then they are more likely to be considered an independent contractor. The fourth factor is the permanence or duration. So in other words, is this like a short-term project, or is it a job that's going to last a long time? And the extent to which the work is integral. So in other words, if you sell things and you hire people to sell things for you, then that selling act, that's integral to the business. Whereas if you sell things and you hire someone to build a wall for you, that's a service that the business needs. It's not integral to the actual business. And so if you're that person building a wall, then you're more likely to be considered an independent contractor. But again, it's all the 5 factors together, and it's case by case. So, and the next, so I just want to point out what factors are not considered, which is the number of hours worked and the convenience to the employer, and whether the employer or the employee wants to save on taxes. Because again, when I talk to businesses and they explain why or how they want to classify their employees, they bring up those factors. But in reality, as you saw in the previous slide, they're not, they are not factors. So what rights do employees have versus independent contractors? So first of all, cannot discriminate against employees. I think most people know that. Can't discriminate based on sex and gender, religion. And actually that list gets longer and longer. But the point is that, you can't choose like a Black employee can't choose a white employee over a Black employee. The next right is health insurance. If the business is large enough, if it has, if 50 or more employees under like Obamacare, the employer has to provide health insurance options to the employee and their children. The spouse is not required, but most employees end up doing that anyway, because it just, it becomes a nice perk at that point. So again, a lot of employers want to avoid that, that responsibility and that expense by classifying their employees as independent contractors. But again, the employer still has to provide that, even if they misclassify their employees. So that would be considered a violation. Hours and overtime, of course, when it comes to independent contractors, you don't have to pay them overtime if you're the employer, and you don't really, there's no rules around the hours that they work if they're an independent contractor. But the employee, there's actually not that many rules about actual hours worked, but they just get a meal break after 7.5 hours. If you are a nursing mother, you also are entitled to breaks to pump. So those are, I mean, that's really it, as far as breaks. More rights is the unpaid leave under the Family Medical Leave Act. If the employer is a certain size, then they have to provide a certain amount of unpaid leave. If the employee becomes sick, or if they have to care for a loved one, a lot of employees do use that as maternity leave too. But that's something that these like larger businesses have to provide. And the employee also has to, the employer has to provide supplies. So in other words, you can't hire an employee and then make them pay for your overhead, and it's not always obvious. It's like subtle. Like if you hire someone to make a delivery and that's part of their job, and they're using their car and they're like using their money to fill the gas, that's a violation of the worker's rights. Whereas an independent contractor, they use their own supplies. And of course, like I said before, like workers' compensation, if there is an injury on the job, you have to carry that insurance. And that's for the benefit of the employee. Rights of independent contractors, not as many rights, really. Before 2018, actually, an employer could discriminate against an independent contractor based on race, color, national origin, and that whole list that you see on my screen. But as of 2018, actually now independent contractors have that same right. And besides that, independent contractors have freedom. That's what makes them an independent contractor, really. Ultimately, they have the like right to work, somewhere else. They have the right to how to work, when to work, where to work, that sort of thing. Once you start to control them and the employer takes away those rights, then you end up in a position where you are misclassifying them, because that violates that first factor of control. So what happens if you misclassify? As an employer, the employee can sue for wage and labor violations. And in that case, the employer could actually be liable for triple the amount of damages, which is the wage claim, and attorney's fees. So you can see that the employer actually bears a lot more risk. And it's not that hard for the employee to find an attorney, or even to have the state sue on behalf of the employee, and to go after the employer for those violations. So the employee doesn't even have to pay money to an attorney, whereas the employer now has to like defend. So in that case, you really want to think twice about misclassification, because the damages to the employer could be pretty bad. And also you might have to pay taxes, and Nora can talk more about that. And honestly, it's just bad publicity. If it comes out that, if you're a business and, people are getting word that you are violating your workers' rights, then people will not want to work for you. It's that simple. And lastly, how does the government even find out? So, like I said before, the worker can file a complaint with the federal and state agencies. It doesn't have to be even them. If they find that their coworkers are being, abused, it could, like they can file those complaints. Of course, like I said before, the worker could also sue. And of course, there are actual audits that take place, by the government and the IRS. So that is the legal perspective on the difference between independent contractors and employees. And now I'm going to turn it over to Noor Al-Masri, who will talk about the financial side.
Thank you, Danya. That was very informative.
You're welcome.
I'm going to...
You're able to share your screen, right?
Yes, I should be. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the difference really quick, because Danya covered that part. 3 topics I'm going to cover. Why should we know the difference, how to determine the classification, and then the consequences that you might get through the IRS because of the misclassification. So we all know, it's for your employee, you must withhold income taxes and pay their Social Security and Medicare for wages. You don't have to do that for independent contractor. How do you determine now, I'm not gonna go in details about this because Danya already spoke about control, who controls what is accomplished and how, where is it accomplished, how is it done, what's in if the employee is using their own laptop, for example, or the company laptops, that makes a difference. Where the relationship between the employer and the employees, where is the job done? Let's say like you have a shop and you have a cashier, that employee, it has to be classified as an employee because he's doing the job at your place. So there's no way you can pay them as independent contractor or you're going to be in violation. For your employees, are you giving them benefits? Of course, contractors don't have that right, but the employees will. Also, the employees, like if they do use any, if they do buy anything to do the job you're assigning to them, you have to reimburse them, while you don't have to reimburse the independent contractor. Now, I want to talk more about if you are an independent contractor, you have to know that you are self-employed, which means that you are a business. So you have to take care of your own taxes. You have to pay your Social Security and Medicare. And you know, like when you are an employee, you will have to pay half of what you owe the government on Social Security and Medicare, and your employer will pay the rest. While when you are a self-employee, that you have to pay both of them, but you get to deduct the rest. I see a lot of people when they do this side hustle where they are independent contractor, they don't recognize that they are a business actually, and they have to treat themselves as a business. And what they do, like they get whatever they get paid and they report it as an income, while they have to deduct their expenses. They have to, when they do their taxes, they have to do a Schedule C. Schedule C let you to deduct all the expenses. So your net income is not what you have paid. You have to deduct all the expenses you spend on that job. And also you have to pay quarterly taxes, like it's going to be estimated taxes, where a lot of professionals advise at that time, like you have to incorporate yourself. You don't have to, like there's nothing to say you have to, but it's better for you for protection, and so it's more clear. It's more, you have to legally protect yourself. If you watch the live we did before, me and Danya, it can go more about that details. But you can be incorporated as LLC or whatever, like you can go watch that. It's on YouTube channel with Danya and myself. So you can watch it in any YouTube channel and you can learn more. But what I want you to know now, like when you do any side hustle, you just have to take care of your quarterly estimated taxes, and you have to deduct whatever cost you inquire to do that job, and don't just let it go and pay more taxes, or don't skip your quarterly estimated taxes, because you would pay a penalty by the end of the year, because government, the IRS want their money as soon as possible. They don't want to wait for that. Also, the employer, like when you do have your employees, you have to make sure you file the quarterly taxes and see how much you paid. You have to report it to the government. There's like form you have to take care of every quarter, and then annual form that's just for payroll taxes. If you need help on that, like you can always talk to your professional, and you can get help. Like payroll, it's not as simple as just writing a check. You have to do all the work that's entail the payroll, like all the costs that's with it, but you cannot avoid, because otherwise you'll be in trouble. The general rule is everyone who works for you is an employee. If you can control what will be done and how it will be done, like you control the outcome and you want them to do a certain way, you don't let them like do it their way, so then you have to classify them as an employee. There's like certain you know, like certain stuff like helps you to determine who's independent contractor and who's employee. Some classification by the IRS, like statutory employee, which is an independent contractor who is considered an employee for tax withholding purpose if they meet certain conditions. So they're independent contractor, everything say like they are independent contractor. The only thing you have to do is you have to still consider them employee just because they you have to withhold their taxes. So these are like are the things that you have to use to determine if they are independent contractor that you have to withhold the taxes. The contractor states if or implies that substantially all the service are to be performed personally by them. So they don't have like they don't have their own employee and then they do it. So you still have to withhold. So they're not company, they are not incorporated. So you have to take care of that. And if they don't have investments on the equipment, so if they use your equipment, they don't have an equipment they can be used, they're performing a service that they don't even need equipment. And also if the service they are providing is for you only, so it's always for you, so they don't have like multiple people they do this service for, like a driver that for your business, or like someone just come to clean your place and that's the only place they're working on. This is just like few examples. And there is also another classification of statutory non-employees. And this is three items: direct sellers, licensed real estate agents, certain companion sitters. And I'll go on details on each of them a little bit. So direct sellers or real estate agents, they have the same rule. They're treated as self-employed for all federal tax purposes, including income and employment taxes, if they meet the certain substantially all payments for their service are directly related to sale or other outputs rather than the number of hours they worked. So it's like they're working on a project basis rather than like they're working few hours. So this is one of the items that you can use so to know if you have to consider them self-employed or not. Their service are performed under a written contract stating that they will not be treated as employees for federal tax purposes. So clearly that contract you have to do through an attorney to make sure that you are covered on this part. For companion sitters, they are not employed of a companion sitter placement service, are generally treated as employment for federal tax purposes if they're working only for you. So you have to take care of their withholding. So treat them as your employees. So the consequences, I'm gonna just talk about the consequences per IRS, since Danya already went through the legal consequences, but with IRS, you might be held liable for employment taxes. And well, no, if the IRS did not get the taxes on time, there's interest they're gonna charge you, there is penalties, and they determine how much penalty they will charge you. And this can be easily done. You know, like when you file your taxes, you have to file. It depends on how are you incorporated, whether you're S Corp, LLC. So you have to either like do Schedule C or other forms, and they will see there's always a place for contractors. And if they see that it doesn't make sense, like you are a shop and you have all of them, you have as contractors, and you're not paying taxes on a payroll, you don't have a payroll, that will raise a red flag with the IRS, and then they will come after you. Just want to say, like, a lot of people say, oh, I've been doing this for years and nothing happened. Okay, if nothing happened yet, it doesn't mean it's not gonna happen. And also there's like a form for in the IRS, the people who work for you can file if they feel that they were misclassified. If the, because you're violating their rights, you're not paying their Social Security and Medicare, which they can benefit later in life from that. So you're violating a right. So they can file that with the IRS to let the IRS estimate how much you have had to deduct from them. Otherwise, they will lose that right. They will lose the right if they didn't go to, unless the IRS like went after you and your taxes were flagged. So if your employee did that, they IRS then come after you, and you will be under audits, and it's going to be a big problem and a lot of cost. They might to, destroy your business eventually, just because you try to avoid some other work and some expenses that you cannot avoid. It's just like, it's not something you can avoid. You have to get it done. Just if you are opening a store, you have to get the inventory, or else you cannot sell. Same thing. This is something like you have to take care of as a business owner. And if you are not sure how to, classify your employee, you can always ask a lawyer for the legal side, and an accountant for the IRS side, for financial side. And if it's hard and you don't want to go to anyone, like, you can always file a form to the IRS to help you determine that, if it's not obvious, if you don't see it in the rule, and if you seek a professional opinion. And most of the time they'll be able to tell, but if it's like really special case, there is a form we can file with the IRS, and it takes usually 6 months for them to determine if your employee are independent contractor or employees. And that form can be actually filed either from the employer or from the employee itself. So if you are an independent contractor, or a person just want to see if anyone hired you, they have to consider you an independent contractor or an employee, you can just file that with the IRS. If you're doing this over and over again, that can help you determine how are you supposed to be hired. And that you can ask that for the employees, for your employer, and tell them that's the determination through the IRS, and you would like to be classified as that, as the law says, or as the IRS says. So they have to do that for you. Or if you're an employer, there's that same form that can be filed for you for any position you want to hire for. So as I said, usually it takes 6 months, but now with COVID and everything else, who knows, like everything takes longer. So it's easier just to go ask a professional and let them help you decide, so you can avoid any problem, any penalties, any other consequences you might face. That's all I want to go through. And if you have any questions, I guess we're gonna open it for questions. And you can contact me or contact Danya for any information or clarification later on if you're seeing this after live. And it's gonna be in both our YouTube channels again. And feel free to contact us. And I will have also a link for a checklist that you can download you can download just to help you prepare for your tax, business tax. And it's not too late to do that. You can just, you have to prepare from now, so you have everything ready when the tax season happen. And also I'll let Danya speak about her side.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was very informative. Yeah, it's I guess it's not surprising that it takes 6 months for the IRS to get back to you. That's way too long, but I agree. It's just probably easier just to reach out to a professional, because if you don't know how to hire someone and you have to wait 6 months and you have that spot vacant, it could hurt your business. And otherwise, it sounds like a great resource. It's just that just takes way too long. Yeah, so on my end too, I have you can follow me on Facebook, or you can go on my YouTube, and I am, like, I'm always posting videos that can help businesses, and and some other areas of law. And I also have a free cheat sheet. If you're a business owner, you probably do a lot of contract negotiation, so you can download that form that helps you negotiate contracts. And so that's all I have. If anybody has any questions, you can drop it in the chat. Otherwise, that is the end of our presentation. So we'll just wait about a minute, if anybody wants to tap. Otherwise, we'll end the meeting. I know we have a participant here in Zoom, and also check the Facebook to see on the Facebook Live